welcome to the Koru Education Podcast, episode 2. We are really lucky today. My guest is a lady called Georgina Gray, an inspiring senior leader who's worked globally around various different countries: India, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and China. I met Georgina in China, where I visited one of her schools, and we went in and we saw the work that Georgina and her team were doing to embed well-being. I was talking about data, and we saw the well-being that was going on in the school, perhaps in a setting that's not always the easiest to embed well-being to. So I was really impressed with that, and Georgina and I have become friends since, and now we work together through Koru Education, and I'm delighted to have her here today as our guest. So thank you for joining us, Georgina.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for the lovely introduction.
No problem. Today we're going to be talking about well-being, and I suppose it's pertinent that we're recording this episode on National Suicide Awareness Day in the UK. It's worth saying as well that we'll be sharing some links and some notes at the end that will have access to free training for suicide prevention and suicide awareness, and I hope that anyone watching this takes the time to take advantage of that training and that information. We'll leave it at that point, and I'm going to go straight over to Georgina now and say, if we're talking about well-being, two things, I suppose. What is it that sparked your passion in well-being as a school leader? And secondly, what do we understand well-being to actually mean? Because it might have different meanings in different places around the world and to different people.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So what sparked my interest is that we've seen a rise in the number of children who are having more sort of well-being challenges, if you like. And the statistics show that 20% of children between the ages of 5 and 19 have a mental health condition. That's 1 in 5. And you've just touched on suicide, but suicide is the leading cause of death for 15 to 29-year-olds. And those statistics really bring home how important it is that we are, as older people, as mature people, as institutions, educational institutions, we are doing whatever we can to try and support our young people, not just through academics in schools, but also to try to meet their needs socially, emotionally, psychologically, as well as physically, to try and develop them as sort of rounded well-being, to develop them as rounded human beings, to be able to take on the challenges that life throws. So that's really sort of where my passion for well-being comes from, the increase that we've seen in the number of children who are experiencing mental health conditions.
And do you think we have a common understanding of what well-being actually is in schools amongst teachers and things like that? Or do we have differences of opinion as to where well-being falls? And does that matter if we have different ideas?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because I come from a primary background, and I really believe that well-being in a school is everybody's responsibility. I don't think it should be, for example, a Senko who is overseeing well-being. I feel that it should be the class teacher as that person, or perhaps the homeroom teacher, as that person is the person who should be the person who's getting to know the pupil better, the student better. And I firmly believe that the connections that can be made between a trusted adult and a teacher and the pupil is really what is the start of that path of supporting a child's well-being. Now, is there a common definition? Not so sure. I do believe that it's really important that schools actually spend time on developing their own definition of what well-being is, developing their own policies on what well-being is and what support children can be given, or young people can be given in the school. I think having that common definition leads to common language, a consistency of approach within an organisation, so that all children get the support that they require. I was reading in Tess earlier on that I think it's the Children's Commission school census was saying that there's a large number of schools, particularly here in the UK, where staff and schools are not aware of children who are going through bereavement, for example, or children whose carer or parent is in prison. And those sorts of factors really need to be known, because those will hugely determine a child's well-being and how they arrive at school. So I think there is probably still work to be done, but I do think that a lot of different agencies, organisations, government agencies, schools are acknowledging that. We've seen an increase in, obviously, there's a lot of discussion around the impact of social media on children's well-being and young people's well-being nowadays. And, I say nowadays, that's really been since, the last sort of 20 years since social media has started to increase. And I think schools and education are moving forward with that now. I'm very privileged that I've worked in international schools where we have probably been able to take our foot off the academic accelerator a little bit, so that we have been able to really focus in on teaching well-being to our children.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's a question that comes to mind. You and I have both worked in China, and when I was leading pastoral discussions in China with parents, I occasionally came across a little bit of tension between the idea that my view of well-being and the view of well-being that the parents I was working with had were quite different. And it sometimes made for quite challenging discussions, and it was a difficult route to find an outcome that worked well for all parties. And I think both sides were entirely well motivated. We just came from very different backgrounds. Now, you've worked in many different places, and I'm wondering if that's an experience that you shared, and perhaps what solutions you came up with to overcome those cultural barriers.
I think yes. To say yes, the different cultures have different ideas about what well-being is. Taking China, for example, you've got the pressure on students of the Gaokao, which is that all-important exam, which really does determine what happens further on in a child's life, and that can bring immense amount of pressure from themselves, from society, and also from family. So I think sort of within China, that's something that is really driving an awful lot of pressure on children. Now, speaking to a number of the parents, actually, the staff who actually worked in our schools, we worked at British style international schools. But speaking to quite a lot of our local staff whose children went through or are going through the Chinese system, they are very aware of the pressure that is on their children, but they are also very aware of what they then need to do as parents to try and support their children through that. So it's balancing the pressure of what they need their children to do, and what their children actually want to do is to be working really hard and get good grades, to get to a good university, to get a good job, as opposed to then really what parents are trying to do to support their children. Now, at our school, we were very fortunate that most of the Chinese families who came to our school really sort of came into our system, which was very much that we valued well-being, we valued the beyond the classroom experiences of our students, as opposed to just the academic route. Now, I think a lot of schools, I've talked just now about connection. Again, very privileged to be in a school where we were able to offer a huge range of beyond the classroom experiences. And it's in probably those moments where those connections are made. Children feel a sense of belonging. They have a sense of purpose within a school. And I think that trying to develop that within our children, so they're not just the recipient of education, that they're involved in education, that they have a purpose within the school, and their purpose isn't just to come in and sit and learn. Developing purpose, developing belonging, developing connection are all huge contributing factors, I believe, to a child's well-being within a school. And I think with all of that, then you're building resilience in children. And I think that idea of resilience, that idea of being able to bounce back, is also something that needs to be modelled and taught within the school, and not just necessarily through PSHE programs, but in the way that staff give feedback to children, for example, and sort of perhaps have more conversations which are sort of at that sort of positive mindset of, okay, you haven't done this yet, but what can you do to get there? And I think all of that then builds resilience, which then leads into well-being in our students.
That's really interesting, that need for belonging and that need of sort of purpose and so forth. That's a common thread that comes out in many of the discussions. I'm interested to know, you also touched on the idea of academic pressure, which I think anyone that's taught anywhere in the world will have felt at some point. I myself have sat in the office with the principal talking about my results review, probably around this time most years when I've been teaching. And it is a stressful place, and you do feel that pressure. Do you think there is a sort of a tension between the curriculum and those academic needs and well-being for children, and how do we go about balancing those two particularly?
Yeah, I think there is a tension. It's very interesting because I've recently come back to the UK and done some teaching in a school here, and I feel that there's a lot more pressure in terms of academics than possibly what we had in our international schools. The schools that I've worked in have had the opportunity to create a bespoke curriculum, which is more of a sort of transdisciplinary, interconnected, inquiry type curriculum. And I think that if you can take time to do that, you then provide children with an inspirational, aspirational, motivational curriculum, which helps children to become more engaged in their learning, helps them to have that connection with their learning. I mean, good learning is all about trying to connect with children and help them realize why they're doing the learning. If there's no purpose behind it, they're not going to be engaged. So I think we've had the opportunity to ensure that the academics are such that the children want to do it, want to learn. And actually the results you've talked about, data, the results that we've shown through UK style assessments, we've shown that our children, even though majority of them were second language, are actually achieving similar, if not better, results than the UK. And I personally believe that is because of their engagement in the curriculum, as well as the time that the teachers have to engage with the children. those sort of connections that teachers do have, the morning, in the morning where it's not particularly rushed and you don't have to necessarily listen to 5 readers in your registration time, but actually to be able to sit back and go and have a conversation with quite a few of your children on a one-on-one basis, check in with them when they come in the morning, see how their extracurricular activity went, what they did last night. All of those things builds that trusted relationship between the adult and the student, and that's what then leads to that connection, which leads to the well-being, in my opinion.
I love that idea of having sort of non-accountable time, if you like, just to chat to youngsters and indeed their parents. I've seen it operate in a similar sense with parents, and just having that opportunity to talk about the football or the extracurricular activity that they've been doing, their theatre production, whatever it happens to be, it builds that warmth and trust, and that is such a solid platform to move forward with. You can then have those difficult conversations. How did you go about assessing well-being in the various schools that you've worked in, apart from the kind of informal teacher-pupil relationship side of it? Did you do anything formal to assess it? Did you have any check-in tools that the students used or anything like that? Any surveys?
Yep, we did. So we had an online survey that the children, well, as teachers, they had to set aside one morning session to do it. However, the children could just pick up an iPad at any time, log in, and then just do the survey. So that could have been on a daily basis. Now, the results would come through to senior leaders in the school, and if a child had said that they needed help, for example, on that day, then that senior leader would wander down the path. I remember a child, actually, I think she was year 3 or year 4, when I got the results through. It was like, yeah, I'm not feeling good, I really need help. I was like, right, okay, I'll go and quickly catch up with her. And I was like, are you okay? She's like, yeah, I can't do this maths question.
But that's kind of the point, that it's not about the thing itself. It's about the perception of it. It's
Absolutely.
about how big it feels, and to a child that age, that's a big thing.
Absolutely. To know that they could have the head teacher, just come down
Yeah.
and sort of check in with them after they'd filled out that survey. So that was actually really powerful. And we logged the data as well, and children who were saying that they're not okay on a regular basis, we caught up with. We also had things like the past data.
Yeah.
We did on an annual basis, and we correlated that then with our data of behavior, our those regular check-ins as well.
Yeah.
We had our records from students who would go see the counsellor on a regular basis or the nurse on a regular basis. So I know that you love data. So all of that data would help us really to draw a picture of a child. We've also done before as well, where we've printed out a photo of every child in a year group. And as a year group, the teachers have gone through and gone, okay, well, yeah, that child's known. I can tell you this, this, and this about that one. That one's known. That one's known. And then they would be able to highlight any child within a year group who wasn't particularly known. And we all know that perhaps some of those quieter children are often overlooked.
Yeah.
If we've got children who are exhibiting more challenging needs in a classroom, they tend to get our attention. So that was a really fabulous exercise to go through, and not necessarily it being the class teacher who needs to know that child. It could be within a year group, and it could be through football or an extracurricular activity, or prefect group or something like that. Another thing that we did set up as well was we asked every child to nominate their trusted adult at school.
Right.
And that was a really powerful activity as well. Not necessarily used by every child, but we had occasions where if a child was feeling particularly upset, we could just go back to the record, have a look, and then just sort of say, well, who is your trusted adult, or would you like to speak to so-and-so, who is your trusted adult. And then that helped the situation there as well. Of
Hmm.
course, all of that we did in conjunction with keeping our families abreast of the conversations we were having with their children.
Yeah.
And we ran well-being sort of sessions as well, about perhaps our behaviour policy, which was not not necessarily, it was more of a behaviour and well-being policy of how
Hmm.
we supported children when they made wrong choices,
Mm.
and the conversations that we had with them, and we tried then to model that with parents so they were able to model that sort of similar sort of approach at home.
Yeah, that whole well-being and behaviour thing is intertwined and intermeshed. And I think administratively as schools, we quite often separate the two and maybe don't see them as quite closely linked as they are.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, our behaviour or children's behaviour is telling a story. You know, there's
Yeah,
always
yeah.
a reason why a child is acting in a particular way. And it might be that they're calling out for help, and it might
Hmm.
be that they're wanting the attention. There might be that they don't feel belonging either at home or at school. There's a number of different reasons why a child might be exhibiting different behaviour.
Hmm.
But then that also takes time to analyze that and to try and figure out what that reason might be, so you can go back to that root cause rather than just fixing the behavior. You're going back to sort of figuring out why that's happening.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I was interested to hear that idea that you talked about, sort of just knowing each other in the school community.
Mm,
I visit a lot of schools in the work that I do, and a lot of really good schools. And the ones that really stand out to me are where the teachers, the senior leaders, and the principal know the kids in the school. You mention a name, they know their quirks, they know their frailties, they know their strengths. And there was one head in particular that modelled this very well for me when I worked in China, and I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name. It was Paul Wallace Woodruff, one of the finest head teachers that I've met. A little bit eccentric, quite entertaining head to work with, but he really had the interests of the individual at heart, and he knew every child in his school. And 2 weeks in, he asked me in as his housemaster, and he was just asking me about the kids, what they did, in their time off, and what their interests were, what their strengths were, and that was very much his focus on how he ran the school. And I
mm,
think that it stands out. Taking this a step further, we've talked a lot about some practical stuff there, and I think that's all really good stuff that schools and teachers can bring to bear. Um, do schools model well-being within their staff cohorts in a way that helps students see it actually working as role models, if you like? Are schools very good at implementing well-being around staff and their
mm.
teachers?
Ooh, good question. I think it's changing. I know the schools that the school I've recently worked for, the group of schools that I've recently worked for, have a staff wellbeing policy, which really does focus in on ensuring staff are okay. Um, Again, through that, I think there's that belonging. I go on and on about belonging and
As you should, Georgina.
and I think that is so important for staff. And asking that question really probably is, if we want our staff to be supporting our children's well-being, we need to ensure that our staff's well-being is right, because quite often um, there's a lot of sort of neuroscience about co-regulation now, and if a teacher is not feeling present as they should be, or if they're not feeling calm, if they're not feeling that their well-being is being looked after, then actually that will probably set the tone, if you like, within the classroom as well. So I think it's really important that schools do ensure that their staff well-being
Mm.
is looked after. Now, different strategies for that. I mean, I'm a massive fan of coaching. I'm a massive fan of having time to listen to people, to connect with people. And just like you were saying, Chris, about, the head teacher knowing every child, every sort of thing that makes them tick. Really, as a head or a senior leader, you need to know every member of staff and their children, what they do at the weekends. Not just to make them know, just to make them realize that they are known, that they're cared for, that you're interested. And I think that goes a really long way in supporting a member of staff on their well-being. If you can create that type of environment, then staff will feel that they can come and talk to you, and be open with you. It's very interesting. I was in a coaching conversation with a client months ago, and she was actually saying that somebody who was in her team approached her because they felt really overwhelmed, and actually what was causing the overwhelm was nothing to do with work. It was something, it was a house move that was happening, or it was children going off to university, and that idea of empty nesting, and that so much of that can come into somebody's workplace, and not everybody can be 100% every day. And I think leaders, if they get to know their staff, and they will be able to know when somebody isn't 100%, and be able to follow up with some contact with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that we've talked about well-being with children, and we've perhaps touched on the idea that those themes run true for adults as well. It's that sort of human connection, and I think those traits run true. If you were to give one piece of advice to a school leader or a senior member of staff within a school that was identifying well-being as a little bit of a glitch for their place of work, what would that one piece of advice be? Where would this start?
I think I would say, to start, you need to be starting to talk about well-being. You need to start talking about emotions, not necessarily, sharing your own, but within your staff meetings, to really start focusing in on well-being, perhaps within year groups. Well-being is put on the agenda of every meeting, so that year groups or departments can track student well-being as part of their weekly, bi-weekly meetings, and also within the senior leadership as well, talking about well-being of self or well-being of other staff in the school. So I think my first bit of advice would be to be starting to talk about it, and put it onto your agendas on every meeting that happens in the school.
And actually that's a really powerful thing in and of itself, and possibly makes a massive impact. We often see things like that as intangibles, but in reality, once you open the door, it becomes a real tangible benefit. So, well, listen, Georgina Gray, it's been a delight to listen to you today. Some really great ideas. I'm not going to call it advice, because I don't think it was shaped in that fashion. I think it was throwing those ideas out there for people to pick up and run with in a way that works for them. But your perspective from China and all of those other countries, and your time coaching has been really, really helpful today. So, Georgina Gray, True Wisdom Coaching, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for having me on your podcast today.